Dave Zirin, a year ago today, before the coronavirus pandemic upended pro sports and everything else, what were you doing? What were you working on? What were you looking forward to?
Two things sports related, one political, one personal. I had just interviewed former NBA player David West about his support for Bernie Sanders. And talking to David West, it looked like there were going to be a significant layer of athletes looking into Bernie. And I was being asked to just facilitate some connections, some sit downs, some conversations. And that whole move went dead as fried chicken as soon as the pandemic hit. All plans went by the wayside. Personally, I was coaching my son Jacob to an unbeaten season in his 10 and 11-year-old league. I got to add that. Jake, I don't know why I'm adding this, but he was the leading scorer and point guard on the team, dropping like 5 threes a game. Just the player I always wanted to be in my son. Surely there's nothing unhealthy about expressing that. And the last championship game was canceled because of the virus. And I had to deal with a lot of 10-year-old broken hearts. And it was a definite sign that things were not going to be good going forward.
Oh my goodness. Justin Jackson from the Los Angeles Chargers, who, like me, is a former football player at Northwestern, like Justin and I are like, he was probably this good. And I was just a shade behind him on the, in the all-time pantheon of Northwestern football players, but he's also a very big Bernie Sanders guy.
I was talking to him too. The world looked wide open.
I'm telling you. Meghan McPeak, 1 year ago today, before the pandemic upended everything, what were you working on? What were you looking forward to?
I was getting ready to watch the team on the road on the second night of a back-to-back in Greensboro and preparing for them to return home to get some games under my belt after a road trip, and also working on a series that I was doing with my broadcast partner, Tony Massenberg, which we were able to get in just in the nick of time before everything went, upwards and onwards and flipped on its head. So we were able to finish that off and get it literally just under the gun for the sponsorship requirement. But I was looking forward to getting back in the gym, and then, everything went, we know which way it went. It went sideways and upside down and every other way.
1 year ago today, I was in Las Vegas. I was covering the title fight between Tyson Fury, the rematch, the heavyweight unification title rematch between Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder. And I, like a lot of people, Deontay Wilder was like the Patrick Mahomes, in that all the fundamentals told you that Tyson Fury should win that fight because when everything else is equal, you pick the boxer, but you pick the better boxer. But Deontay Wilder's power shifts those equations in theory, and then in practice, Deontay Wilder got mollywopped, and I was looking forward to doing more stuff like that. And then the pandemic happened. Thankfully, like a lot of what I do is pandemic proof. I was looking forward to finishing my book proposal. I did that, but I was also looking forward to doing stuff just like what we're doing right now. Welcome to the final episode, guys, of this first season of Bring It In. So don't worry, we'll be back after our little March break. But after this, we're going on hiatus. I'm not doing this alone. I'm with the best panel in the business, Meghan McPeak in Washington, D.C. Say hello to the people.
Hello, people.
And with us, also in Washington, D.C., sports editor of The Nation, author of 10 books with an 11th on the way, Dave Zirin.
Hello.
And so a lot of what we're doing this week is looking at the big picture, 1 year after the official beginning of this pandemic, what has changed in the sports world, what needs to change in the sports world, what unfortunately won't change in the sports world. We're going to tackle all of that along with a bit of a tip of the cap to Rudolph Giuliani. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. And if you're intrigued, keep watching, keep listening. But it is also the last episode of Black History Month. And so every Monday during Black History Month, we record every Monday, we share Black History Month book suggestions. So I'm going to go last. Dave Zirin, you're going to go first. What do you recommend that people read?
Oh, have I got a special out-of-print book for you today. And oh my goodness, how I've enjoyed going through the crates, if you will, to be able to bring a book every week. Now, look, a lot of folks surely know that Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals at the 1936 Olympics in Hitler's Germany. Some folks know that decades later, Jesse Owens was sharply critical of John Carlos and Tommy Smith at the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City for their protesting ways. So much so that Jesse Owens famously went into the locker room before the 200-meter race that Smith and Carlos raised their fists at the request of the racist International Olympic Committee chief Avery Brundage to try to stop them and others from protesting. That all is very known history. But few know that in 1972, he wrote this revealing and very bracing short book called simply, I Have Changed, about how he now believes that Carlos and Smith were right and that militancy holds the only way forward for Black liberation. And he wrote this book in his 60s. No one talks about this book. It's been left out of Owens's biographies, but here it is. It's called I Have Changed, a shockingly personal statement in a tragically impersonal time by Jesse Owens. A remarkable book.
Amazing. So what actually changed in those 4 years?
Well, it's interesting. He wrote a book in the meantime, too, about how he disagreed with Smith and Carlos, really defending his position, and it was called Black Think. And sort of a play on groupthink and about how he stands outside the groupthink. And then for him, it was just a matter of a lot of deep thinking and a lot of the failures in the early 70s to see the kind of change that were promised by mainstream politicians. And that just left him feeling very cold. And he felt very used by Avery Brundage in 1968.
I can imagine, but what I can't imagine is him watching the election of Richard Nixon and thinking, you know what, a better day's coming for Black people thanks to this new president.
That's definitely in the book also, but it's just such a cool small title. I read a footnote about it in a different book about the 36 Olympics, went out and found it in a used bookstore website. And it really is, if people can get their hands on it, it's a fascinating read. I Have Changed by Jesse Owens.
Amazing. That's a great find, Dave. That's an amazing find. Meghan McPeak, you're up.
Okay, so all month long, I've been doing it without the actual book because I'm an audiobook person. For example, working out this morning, I had Barack Obama in my ear. Who doesn't want to hear Barack Obama drop an F-bomb? I know I do. It's fantastic. But his book is not my book. The book that I'm going with this week and to close out is by Gary Washburn of the Boston Globe and Mark J. Spears of ESPN's The Undefeated. And it is on the great Spencer Haywood. And I finally figured out how to get it so I can show you guys the book cover.
There you go.
On my iPad. So it's basically they're sitting down with him and hearing everything that is Spencer Haywood, from him growing up as literally a cotton picker in the state of Mississippi at a very young age, going from that to obviously what he was able to do as a high school basketball player and take the NBA to the Supreme Court and completely flip it on its head with what we now know as the high school rule, which is known as the Spencer Haywood rule. So it's the Spencer Haywood rule battles basketball and the making of an American iconoclast. And you also hear many different stories of his activism, everything he's gone through as a basketball player. And I think it's a read for the next generation to know the greats who built this game that they're now watching, who had paved the way, essentially. He paved the way for guys like LeBron James, the late Kobe Bryant, Kevin Garnett, and every other player who came out of high school straight to the NBA. If it was not for Spencer Haywood, it would not have been available to them at the time because of what he did with taking the NBA to the Supreme Court. And of course, he was married to Iman, if you're into fashion.
Interesting. That I didn't know. Wow.
Yes. Okay. That's the only tidbit I'm going to give you from the book giveaway.
That's quite a come up. Good for him. Good for Spencer Haywood. Amazing. Another great pull, Meg. And then like with authors too, that like are still alive and still circulating and then we can tweet at and stuff like that. Gary Washburn, I remember in 2014 at the NABJ convention, every Friday night, there's the big sports task force party. And then the Saturday morning, there's a 5K race, and like the true dedicated people go to both. And I managed to drag Gary Washburn to the 5K race the morning after the task force party.
I have been to
Listen,
that party, and you are horrible for doing that.
but listen, you have not fully experienced NABJ until you've done the task force party and the 5K back to back on 2 hours sleep. But Gary did it. All right, so my book is not a sports book. It's a really special book to me because it's up there with the one we did 2 weeks ago, Why Black People Tend to Shout, in terms of books that were formative experiences for me. And this one is, I don't even have the cover anymore. Maybe you can see the spine. The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. So this is basically the first book I started reading when I decided I was going to read outside of school and that I needed more from my reading than school was giving me. And this was in my mom's bookcase. So it's my mom's copy of this book. Sorry, Mom. Right. But this is from literally 1963, and it's still here. There's passages where my mom has underlined. And so what this book was sort of like this state of the Black American Union. One of these white authors who read an early copy of it described it as a live hand grenade tossed into white America's bedroom or living rooms by James Baldwin. This is really dense. It's 130 pages. So that's why it appealed to me at 15, because I could read it quickly. About growing up Black in America. James Baldwin is from Harlem. He's probably a generation ahead of John Carlos. You know, he's from that first generation of people whose parents had grown up in the South, but he was born up north. And about what happens to people when they turn 14. 14 years old is kind of this line of demarcation when people really start to recognize how stacked the deck is against them. And how that bears down on your psychology and what you think and what you think your options are going to be and what happens from there. And so the thing about James Baldwin is that he's kind of had this renaissance in the social media era, because so many of his essays, they would build up, the sections of these essays would build up to these one-liners, and these one-liners work really well on social media. But he's definitely worth reading. The Fire Next Time is a great starting point, because it's mid-career Baldwin. It's nonfiction Baldwin, which the Baldwin nerds will tell you is the best Baldwin. And so when you get a chance, and again, like if you're not fully committed to it, it doesn't matter, because it's only 130 pages. And if you're not fully committed to it at the beginning, you will be by the end. But we came here to talk. Go ahead, Dave.
Oh, just real quick. If I was doing a non-sports book, the book Begin Again by Eddie Glaude, which is a meditation about Baldwin. Okay. And what Baldwin would be saying about 2020 is a must read. And by me saying this, it allows us to tweet at Eddie Glaude and say, hey, we recognize that your book is a must read for not just February, but any month.
Absolutely. And same with Democracy in Black, which I have back in there somewhere. Always welcome. Is Eddie, do you know if Eddie Glaude's a sports guy? Because if he is, well then.
He's a 68 Olympics guy. He the whole thing.
All right, let's do it. A future former guest, Eddie Glaude. So first up, it's the end of February, which means it's almost March, which means it's March Madness time, which means the NCAA has decided to press ahead with plans to have the men's basketball tournament and the women's basketball tournament sort of in a single site, but not really, each of them in a single city. The men's tournament at various places around Indianapolis, the women's tournament at various places, I think around San Antonio. And in the one hand, it makes sense because it makes dollars. The NCAA claims they have lost $600 million because of the pandemic. They had to cancel the tournaments last year. But the problem is the pandemic is still ongoing. And San Antonio and Indianapolis are both, as of right now, very high risk zones for coronavirus transmissions. And yet here comes the NCAA, not just having the tournament. If you're going to have the tournament, seal the campus like the NBA did, cool. But no, they've said, we're going to have spectators because we need ticket revenue. Up to 25% capacity in Indianapolis, up to 17% capacity in San Antonio. Do not ask me why, because I don't know. The New York Times lays this out. And the reporter Billy Witz, he talked to John Swartzberg, a professor emeritus at the University of Cal Berkeley, studies infectious diseases. And what Professor Swartzberg says is, I cannot see any good reason to do that. I can see a lot of bad reasons not to do that. Bringing in people from all over the country to a congregate setting is just nuts. Dave Zirin, have we learned anything in the last 11 months, or are we just going to keep doing this?
The NCAA has learned a lot in the last 11 months, and that's that they cannot financially survive without March Madness. On a typical year, the NCAA gets a whopping 89% of their revenue just from the tournament and the TV money that comes through March Madness. Canceling it last year was like cutting a vein, and they're not about to have that. I mean, it's not that the NCAA has become poor, but they're less rich, and that is absolutely not an option. And so I think a lot of what they're doing is extremely reckless. People might hear 25% capacity and think, well, is that really that big a deal if you're in a 12,000 seat gym? But when you think about that, the men's Final Four is going to be in Lucas Oil Stadium, capacity seating 70,000 people. I mean, you're talking about the creation of a super spreader event, made even worse by the fact that this is like the Super Bowl ×5 or ×6, in that you're going to have people coming from all over the country to descend upon the city and stay there for a significantly longer time than people went to Tampa to stay as well. And so I think that this reveals the underbelly of the NCAA. Also, I got to say, even though I certainly understand why the NCAA is doing this, hearing that, all meals are going to be served in hotel rooms and players, coaches, and staff are going to be wearing contact tracing devices throughout the tournament that measures if someone is within 6 feet of an infected person. I mean, it just shows yet again how the NCAA, I mean, they're treating these 18, 19, 20-year-olds as if they're professionals to go through these hardships to play in this tournament, while not paying them like professionals. So there's a lot about it that stinks to high heaven. But if you're the NCAA, you're thinking of this as, whether or not you're going to be able to survive and thrive in the years ahead. But it just reveals, I think, what exists underneath the pleasant surface of the NCAA, which is something quite ugly.
How would you feel if you were a college basketball player and they sent you to a tournament in a high-risk zone and then invited 10,000 of their best friends?
I'd be very uncomfortable. And today's point with Lucas Oil Stadium, I attended the NCAA tournament a few years ago when it was held at Lucas Oil Stadium. That was also the year that the infamous Kevin Ware leg snap injury happened, which in Lucas Oil Stadium, you could hear clearly. So if you've been to Lucas Oil, you know how big that stadium is. And to hear the leg snap very clearly, it was gut-wrenching. But that's a whole other story. And that was in a normal time. That was pre-pandemic when thousands of people could fill into it. And they only use the end zone up until, I believe, the 50-yard line. And they're only using half of the stadium when you think of what they do for the NCAA tournament and putting it on. And I believe it was the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8 that were there. So it wasn't even the Final Four and the national championship game, and you still had a full stadium. And I was sandwiched on the sideline in my seat, uncomfortable, in pre-pandemic. Now you're going to ask people to socially distance, wear masks. The one, I think, positive is that alcohol is not served at NCAA games primarily at every single arena. So if they don't serve alcohol, you may not get fools and buffoons taking their masks off and being stupid and putting the risk of transmission at a heightened situation. Especially too, you think about the fact that there could be people who are asymptomatic and don't realize that they are carriers of the virus. And now you're unfortunately spreading it to other people who may get serious symptoms, because we all know the symptoms vary from person to person. And as you stated, there isn't vigorous testing being done for these people coming into the stadium that the players are going through. So if I was playing, I would be very concerned. To be honest, the NCAA tournament for these athletes is one of the most exciting times in their career. And the fact that they can have it is great. However, if I was an athlete, I would tell my parents and my family to stay home. Do not risk it. Don't risk it. Watch me on TV.
Meanwhile, over at the NFL, after this season, broadcast contracts are up. And guess what else is up? The price. The NFL has a series of broadcast deals, right? They have a different deal with each network, one with ABC, one with Fox, one with NBC, one with CBS. And each of them, every deal except the ABC ESPN deal is worth in the neighborhood of $1 billion. And the NFL has said, listen, we're doubling the price. And for the most part, these networks have said, fine, we'll pay $2 billion next year or $2 billion the season after next instead of $1 billion. But ABC and ESPN and Disney, they're already paying $1.9 billion. And so the NFL says, okay, we're going to try to get $3.8 million, and Disney is balking at this. And so we have the CEO of Disney to the media saying, we're looking at this in terms of long-term trend of sports viewership. We've had a long relationship with the NFL. If there is a deal that we will be accretive to shareholder value, we will certainly entertain that and look at that. Now, because I spent a few years as a business reporter, I know what accretive to shareholder value means. It just means it'll make money, because Disney has said, wait a minute, it's one thing to make money after paying $1.9 billion a year. It's something else to make money on a $4 billion a year deal. Meghan McPeak, if you're running Disney, do you open up the checkbook and give the NFL $4 billion a year?
No. I get the least of what the NFL gives out when it comes to the rights. So ESPN's paying the most, but they're getting the least. How does that even make sense? Like that makes absolutely no sense. But you know what? Respect to Disney for pushing back and saying, whoa, 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 whoa. Because they've realized we are getting the least amount of games and the least amount of coverage. Yes, we have Monday Night Football. I get it. But hey, you want the most money from us, but we're going to get the least return on revenue from you. How does that, like, it doesn't make sense to me, and I'm not a financial advisor. So why should it make sense to a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate to give out more money to get less in return?
Well, I think part of Disney's deal is that they get a lot of these streaming rights, which heading into the sports broadcast future, they're increasingly valuable. But now, are they worth twice as much as what TV is going to be? I'm not sure. And the other thing about Monday Night Football is, 20, 30 years ago, like when I was growing up, Monday Night Football was for marquee matchups. But now the marquee matchups are on Sunday night, and Monday night just kind of gets what's left over, with the exception of the occasional Chiefs-Ravens game, something like that. Dave Zirin, is there a limit, or is the NFL finally running into the limits of how much it can, with a straight face, tell people to give them?
First of all, accretive. What is this? The SATs? I'm having to open up a dictionary to follow this discussion. I resent it terribly. Second of all, the NFL hasn't hit its limit. Look, Eric Winston, who's the head of the Players Union, and he once said, former offensive lineman, that running the NFL is being like a bartender on spring break. You have to be really stupid to not make money. And this is one of those cases that points that out to me, because the NFL basically is holding up Disney and saying, look, you're going to spend this money for a very simple reason, because we draw eyeballs during a time where people are very distracted, and sports viewership on the whole is down pretty dramatically across the board in every sport, golf, auto racing, it's down. And NFL ratings were down as well. However, they proved to be far more resilient than other sports. It still proves to be one of the few things that people will watch commercials in between actual broadcasts. And that gives it a value that, other shows in this era of streaming just aren't able to get. And what the NFL is also doing is they're laying down a template. They're being forward looking and saying, this is what it's going to take for us to be profitable in the pandemic era, because we can't depend on people coming into the stadiums on ticket sales. We're not going to be able to depend on concessions. The future is going to mean less people in these stadiums. So we need to keep those profit margins up somehow, and we're going to squeeze it out of Disney, because we can't squeeze it out of the fans, and we can't squeeze it out of local governments in terms of stadium construction costs. So we're going to go to Disney and try to get our money that way.
What else do you think is going to happen, David, in the future? Which of these pandemic features do you think is sticking around?
Well, I mean, the starting point is that you just said that there's a double speak that comes from the ownership ranks of sports. And the double speak is that they want to spread the idea, and they fund politicians who spread the idea that all of this is overblown and that we need to get back to normalcy at all costs. But they also understand that that's not the real world. So they operate from two different sides of their mouths. And in the part that's the real world, I think they understand that the days of the packed stadium, of everybody falling all over each other, I mean, you go to a typical arena, you're already basically related to the person sitting next to you, whether you know them or not. So that feature, and sometimes that's a great part of being at a stadium. It all depends on who you're sitting next to. But I just feel like those days are kind of done. Like the sense of community that we feel out of sports, the sense that I felt when I was a little kid at Game 6 of the '86 World Series. I mean, I worry that is done. That is done, and we're gonna have to figure out different kinds of ways, and we already are, of building community through watching sports. You know, it'll come up through social media, it'll come through much more indirect ways, but the primal feel of being at a stadium with tens of thousands of your closest friends, I fear that that's something that's going to be enduring in its absence.
And I think the other thing that's going to appear is any trace of paper at the stadium. I think we're like any team that can afford to get rid of paper tickets, any team that can afford to get rid of cash and go all digital, all paperless, that's what they're going to do. And they're going to sell it to fans as something that's convenient. But the other benefit for teams is that if I go into a stadium with a ticket, I go into a stadium with a ticket, but they don't know who I am and they don't know what else I'm going to buy. But if I have to scan in every time I go to a stadium, every time I go to a game, they know exactly who I am. They know where I'm sitting. They know how much I paid for the ticket. And when I go buy a jersey, they know what I bought. When I go buy a beer, they know what I bought. And then that enables them to keep collecting data on me and figuring out what I like to buy and then finding ways to sell me more of it. And I think the industry was headed that way in the first place, but I think the pandemic is going to speed that up. Meghan McPeak, what do you think from what we've seen during the pandemic is going to stick around, or what would you like to see stick around, or what would you like to see disappear?
I think the biggest thing that we're going to see that must stick around is touchless everything.
Mm-hmm.
Bathrooms, like that's the biggest one, is a bathroom when you think about it. When you walk in, there shouldn't be a door to walk into. If there is, it should be a swing both ways so that you can hit it with your elbow. The only door you should have to actually touch is the bathroom stall to lock it for your privacy. If they could do that with a sensor that you can like swipe your hand over and it locks, that would be great as well too.
Right.
But I've been to numerous arenas where they have not been updated. You have to push the faucet to turn the water on. That's not touchless. It should be sensor. I've got to pump the soap out or the hand sanitizer out. That should be touchless. Some stadiums have the paper towel rules that you can swipe in front to censor it to come out. Those need to be touchless in every stadium. So I think having as many touchless surfaces needs to be implemented in every single sporting arena in the country, especially in North America. If they can get it around the world, that would be fantastic. But I think North America needs to be the one that starts it, because there's no reason that in 2020, most arenas and stadiums shouldn't be touchless anyways. We've got the technology to do it. So I think it kind of correlates with you and Dave mentioning going paperless.
Absolutely. And as somebody who, as a sixth grader, used the bathroom at the old Comiskey Park, like on the north side of 35th Street in Chicago, I can tell you that touchless bathrooms are highly welcome and long overdue. How I got out of that bathroom without a staph infection, I guess is a miracle. Maybe somebody was praying for me, but long overdue. All right, guys, we're in the bell lap, which means it's time for In and Out. Tee up 3 topics, and we find out whether I and the all-star Bring It In panel are in or out on these things. Up first, our man DK Metcalf is going viral again. So he went viral during the season with that crazy chase down tackle of Buda Baker. He hit 22 point something miles an hour and made the football writers think he could run 9.8 in the 100 meters. We all know football math is very faulty. But what is not in dispute is DK Metcalf's current exploit off-season, messing around at a basketball court.
Oh my god!
And he hits this 1 foot takeoff, one hand cradle reverse dunk. Very reminiscent of what Michael Jordan used to do. So my question to you, Meghan McPeak, we'll start with you because you're the basketball expert here. Do you remember Foot Locker Slam Fest? You might be too young to remember it, but have you looked for it on YouTube?
I remember.
Okay, so get everyone
I've
caught
seen
up
it. I've seen
really
it.
quickly. Yes, Foot Locker Slam Fest. If you watched the college basketball, like on ABC on Saturday, Sunday afternoons in the early '90s, Foot Locker Slam Fest is where they would get all these athletes from these other sports and put them in a slam dunk contest. So Deion Sanders would go against Barry Bonds, would go against Ken Griffey Jr., would go against Barry Sanders, would go against Kenny Lofton, who was a very good basketball player. And so, Meghan McPeak, are you in or out on DK Metcalf going to a reconstituted Slam Fest and walking away with the trophy?
I am in on Slamfest returning, period, because I want to see what athletes in other sports can do in sports that they think they can play in. I'd love to see LeBron suit up for the Dallas Cowboys. Let's see what you got. You said you'd make the team. I want to see what you can do. I'm all in on this. I would actually love to see, NBA All-Star Weekend add in athletes who can actually dunk into the dunk competition. Like, let's make it exciting again. Give me DK Metcalf in the NBA dunk competition. I would take that. I would watch that.
Okay, well, what I don't want to see is LeBron James anywhere near a football field. I like LeBron James, and for that reason, I don't want to see him with concussions and compound fractures and everything else. Dave Zirin, you in or out on DK Metcalf's chances in a reconstituted Foot Locker Slam Fest?
Well, of course, I'm all in on his chances. He's DK Metcalf. How he lasted to the second round is a question that I think future historians will ponder. As for the Slam Fest, I mean, watching it growing up was, for me, a quasi-religious experience, particularly in the form of Mike Conley Sr.
Yes.
And to me, I mean, I remember where I was when I saw Mike Conley Sr. take off from the foul line with a two-handed dunk from the back of his head. And I mean, as someone who, was schooled on the dunk contests of Irving and Neek, I mean, I just couldn't believe what I had just seen. And so I want to see more of that, because to be a great athlete is to be a great athlete. And to see that transposed onto other sports is too much. And by the way, it's always been such a mystery to me that Mike Conley Jr. is like this crafty point guard who gets in the lane, throws up little flip shots, and his father is somebody who can almost literally jump out of a gym. I've never quite understood that correlation, but it's kind of amazing if you think about it.
I am in on bringing back Slamfest. I'm out on DK. I'm in on DK Metcalf beating his contemporaries, the people playing now, only because there are a lot fewer like dual sport athletes and people specialize sooner. So you don't get as many guys who played college basketball, especially like guards, who also wind up playing in the NFL. Like even Nate Robinson, he was 10, 12 years ago. I'm out on DK Metcalf thinking he can beat Mike Powell, Mike Conley Sr., Deion Sanders, Kenny Lofton in a slam dunk contest. Like, you're an incredible athlete, DK Metcalf. Even in your dreams, you might not beat Deion Sanders. Like, your dreams might also be so realistic as to understand that Deion Sanders would wipe the floor with him in a slam dunk contest. And the reason Dave Zirin, he lasted till the second round of the NFL draft was, and NFL draft gurus are wrong about some stuff, is just the fact that he had broken his neck in college. And that was a red flag, which I will grant them that. I will grant them that. Next up, Dave, I'm coming to you. And now I have a hard time saying these words all in the same sentence. But Rudolph Giuliani was on Steve Bannon's podcast talking about Rush Limbaugh. And he told a story about himself and Rush Limbaugh playing golf for some reason with Michelle Wie, who is now Michelle Wie West. And Rudolph Giuliani talked about her making these putts and people taking pictures, and Michelle Wie, having to bend over to make the putt, and the press taking pictures, and Rudolph Giuliani is looking at the underside of her skirt. And that, to him, of course, is a huge punchline. I imagine Steve Bannon laughed at it too, but look, thoughts and prayers to whoever, from a journalistic standpoint, had to listen to that whole podcast to write a story about it. Like, it's right, we're having a hard enough time talking about it. But my thoughts go back to poor Michelle Wie, who had to go through 18 holes of golf with Rudolph Giuliani on one side and Rush Limbaugh on the other. Dave Zirin, are you in or out on playing a round of golf with Rudolph Giuliani and Rush Limbaugh for anything less than Fernando Tatis money?
Oh, I mean, I absolutely would play a round of golf for that money, but trust me, my backswing might, shall we say, reach into their personal space. You see, it's all about how one chooses to play golf. And as someone who has long believed that golf is not, in fact, a sport, I believe that anything that you can gain weight or smoke cigarettes while doing it is a sport.
Right.
As I've stated, I do believe that I would add a full contact variance to golf, in which case I would find it not only financially remunerative, but also very satisfying.
Perfect, Dave. I'm with you. I'm all in only because, look, a lot of us, we have to have our price for something. And my thing is, if you have to sell out, at least get a good price. So I wouldn't play a round of golf with Rush Limbaugh and Rudolph Giuliani for, say, CFL veteran minimum money, right? But for Fernando Tatis money, I could survive one afternoon. It would be very accretive to Morgan Campbell value. So I would do it. Meghan McPeak, what about you?
A reminder of the Fernando Tatis money level.
Oh, Dave, what was it? It's 300, how many million?
$340 million.
$340 million.
Y'all are better than me. That's all. No, not doing it.
No.
For
As a
340
woman,
million?
not doing it.
But that's
My number would be
I can-
at least 500 million.
Listen, I don't blame you. I don't blame you.
As a female, that would be my number. At least 500 million. Knowing what they said about the great that is Michelle Wee West, working on her putting game to improve her game, and she stated in her rebuttal to them, she actually shot better than every golfer at that tournament.
Of course she did.
So, I mean, it clearly was working for her. So no, I need at least 500 million, and I need at least 499 of that upfront.
Up front, exactly. And she's a professional golfer. What the heck made Rudolph Giuliani and Rush Limbaugh think that they could play golf alongside a professional golfer? Like, she probably spent so much of her day just waiting for these two to waddle around the course and finish. Like, if either of those guys broke 110 strokes, I would be surprised. But
they were at the wrong Four Seasons. That's why.
That's enough. That is enough Rudolph and Rush talk to last me several lifetimes. So let's talk about something happier. Last in or out for season 1 of Bring It In with Morgan Campbell deals with our man Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who went back to the Dominican Republic for the offseason and did what a lot of people didn't think he could do. He dropped weight because he went back home. He's hanging out with his grandma, hanging out with his friends. And his grandmother is a legendary cook. She has fed 2 generations of major leaguers. Like, people from other teams, when they come to town, go to Vlad Jr.'s crib because his grandma's there cooking. In spite of all that, managed to drop 40 pounds over the offseason. The team is really excited. The Blue Jays are really excited about what is in store. Meghan McPeak, do you think skinny Vlad Jr. hits 40 home runs this year?
Give me 45. I'm all in. Give me 45. I'm taking the over. And I also want to now get some cooking from his grandma. But this is the biggest thing is I can believe he was able to do it because it's all, as you know, Morgan, it's all about your macronutrients. If you just make sure your numbers are correct, you can drop weight, gain weight, and do it all properly. But I am in on this. I want 45 or more, and I want some of grandma's cooking. Dominican food is one of the best.
We'll see if we can make that happen next time you're in town. Dave Zirin, you in or out on skinny Vlad hitting, relatively skinny Vlad hitting 40-plus home runs this season?
Slim thick.
I'm all in for a couple of reasons. One, dropping that weight, it's going to be terrific for his back, and it's going to lessen the chances of injuries, which will undercut that home run total. The second thing is, look, we just lived through the passing of the great Henry Aaron. Henry Aaron, 755 home runs, skinny as a whippet, but he lifted blocks of ice growing up and built up his wrists. I'm old school. It's all in the wrists. It's all in your quick twitch. It's not about carrying a ton of weight. This isn't football. I think all Vlad did was increase his chances of fulfilling his mammoth potential.
Absolutely. I am out on 40-plus home runs, and here's why. And I'm lucky enough to have seen minor league Vlad play in Lansing, Michigan. So, and this was in low A ball in 2017. And I can attest that this was child's play to him. His last at bat in this league was a 420-foot home run to center field at the stadium in Lansing. So I do expect to see more of that guy now that he has dropped some of the weight. But what I also expect to see is a higher batting average and a lot of doubles. I think Vlad's going to hit 35, 38 home runs. He's going to come within shouting distance of 40, but you're also just going to see a lot of doubles, a lot more time spent on base, and better defense because he'll be able to move around better and fewer injuries. So I think all around, I don't know that Vlad is going to be one of these guys that puts up giant numbers in any one category, but it's going to help him across the board. And I, for one, am super excited to see it. As for you guys, we'll be super excited to see you on the other side of this little hiatus. I know you're going to miss us. It's going to be 4 weeks without us. Meghan McPeak, tell everyone where they can find you during this 4-week absence.
On my Twitter, at Meghan McPeak with an H, because I spelled it the right way. But I want to give an honorable mention shout out to the books this month. It hasn't come out yet, but the Fantastic Athlete Leaving the Pack Behind You has one coming out at the end of March. So it ties in with hopefully when we return.
Yes, absolutely. Perfect. Dave Zirin, it's going to be four long weeks without you. Where can we find you?
Definitely hit me up at Edge of Sports on Twitter. If you reach out to me, I'll reach out to you. And I want to give a shout out to you, Morgan, to Megan, to Sarah, to Ryan, to everybody on the Bring It In team, because I think we're producing something that's different than what's out there. And in our world of oversaturated sports media, producing something that's different is a very difficult task. So thank you, and to everybody, to y'all, to the CBC for making this happen.
Absolutely. And shout out to you, Dave. It's great to get this part of the band back together. Dave and I have crossed paths before. We've made engaging, fun, loud, spicy, raucous radio before. It's great to hear it with you on YouTube. Meghan McPeak, it's great to finally work with you instead of trading texts about 90 Day Fiance and knockout of the year contenders and all of this. So Ryan, Sarah, Aaron, and the crew, by all means, thank you. I'm your host, Morgan Campbell. You guys can find me on Twitter or on Instagram at Morgan P. Campbell. If you like what you've heard and what you've been hearing, be sure to subscribe to CBC Sports here on YouTube. Be sure to like us. Leave a like, leave a comment if you like what you're hearing. Leave a dislike, leave a nasty comment if you don't like what we're hearing. We are sort of like Facebook in that all engagements matter. So go ahead and engage. And we're about to take a short spring break, but we will be back with more Bring It In, more Meghan McPeak, more David Zirin, and more of me, your host, Morgan Campbell. We'll see you in the spring.